There we go. I don't know what that was about. Anyway, we have mic now. Yeah, like I said, I'm still sorting out everything because I will have to read that whole intro all over again. Yeah. I don't know what's going on with my mic. That's why I was like, trying to fix stuff. But anyway, so let's try that again. I knew something was gonna happen tonight. Yeah, it's like I said, I'm still working on stuff. So it's been a little bit, so I'm still sorting things out. So let's try my intro again. Alright. I had a really nice intro written out and everything, so I'm gonna read that again. Alright. Here we go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Galactic Archives. If this is your first time here, I'm Meshla. I write long-form Star Wars fanfiction centered around original characters, layered world building, and the emotional weight that sits between battles rather than just inside them. This space is where we slow down and let those stories breathe. Tonight, we're returning to Storytime. That means we're not workshopping craft and we're not breaking down structure. We're stepping directly into the narrative and letting it unfold the way that it was meant to, through atmosphere, character, and quiet tension. We'll be reading chapters 16 and 17 of Steps into the Past. These chapters sit in that delicate space before something shifts. Armor is prepared. Names are set aside. Decisions are made in low light, and the next mission begins to take shape somewhere out beyond the fog. If you're new to the story, don't worry about catching every reference. Let the tone carry you. You'll pick up what matters. This series follows Marin and the people around her, warriors, healers, sentinels, as they navigate loyalty, trauma, trust, and the cost of stepping into the fire more than once. Storytime here is quiet by design. You're welcome to talk and chat, but you're also welcome to just sit and listen. Make tea, fold laundry, maybe write your own draft alongside the reading. Whatever you decide to do, I'm glad you're here. I let the silence sit where it needs to. If something hits you, let it. If something feels tense, that's intentional. So let's settle in. Alright. That's what I was trying to read when I was muted, and I did test all of this before I went live, so I don't know. Things are being weird. But we're gonna roll with it. So yes. You know what I mean? Oh dear. It's a turn of phrase. Maybe it's an American thing. I don't know. Oh. I'm glad you're here, Zenny. I know you will. Oh boy. I was running a bit behind, so give me just a second while I catch up to what's going on. There it is. Okay. Stuff is out of order. Sorry. To make sure I was opening it in the right order. Because I remember what happened last time. That's completely fair and valid to do. I appreciate when people use me as their inspiration, so thank you. Just getting myself set up over here. Okay, here we go. It has been a hot minute since I read anything. I'd say probably, yeah, a good solid 2 months. So please forgive me if I stumble a little bit or if I don't get the voices just right. It's been a little bit. So I'm gonna get myself a little water and we'll get going. And we're gonna go until these are done. So we'll see how that goes. Oh! Ah! Yes, judgment-free zone indeed. Okay. Yes, all judgment-free and cozy vibes, except for maybe what we're reading. Maybe not so cozy. But bear with me, my friends. Alright. Steps into the past. Chapter 16. Echoes before the storm. Shadowed threads. In August 5, there's an estate. The War Room. The War Room sat deep within the mountain, lit only by the soft glow of the encrypted hollow displays and the muted flicker of the hearth behind a steel grate. The thick doors had been sealed and locked to veil clearance only. Quiet layer of protection over the mountain's natural isolation. Outside, Ral and Harris held the hall. No words were needed. Beck was stationed outside Marin's room. Inside the war room, the air carried a weight that even the recycled scrubbers couldn't clear. A pressure born of too many ghosts and a truth they couldn't yet speak aloud. Greer stood with his arms folded at the edge of the central table, his jaw set in that immovable line Jared had once called his combat face. The hollow feed pulsed, a soft blue shimmer marking the secure connection to Catane's naval command grid. Admiral Connor's projection leaned forward in his chair, his features unreadable save for the flicker of his brown eyes beneath the shadows cast by the transmission field. IT sat opposite Greer, his fatigue still dusted from the short ride up from the outpost hangar. His posture mirrored Greer's, straight-backed, his weight braced on booted feet, ready for a fight that hadn't yet come. Confirmed reports of Deathwatch activity near Druckenwell's outer lanes. Connor's voice cut low across the room, each word a quiet drumbeat. Shipping losses over the last week matched their pattern. Hidden fade raids, precision targeting of lightly guarded convoys. Fleet command wants it closed out before the corridor destabilizes. Pattern feels too clean, IT said, rubbing a thumb along his knuckles. No wasted shots, no called bluffs. Either they've got a new commander, or they're being fed targeting data. His gaze flickered to Greer, unspoken meaning there. Like Collier. Greer didn't move, but the muscle in his jaw ticked. It's the same path as before, he said at last, his voice low and measured. Quiet source, high priority. We bit once, and Theta 9 walked into 30 guns, barely walked back out. Connor shifted. Even through the flicker of the projection, the weight in his stare was unmistakable. You're telling me this smells like Collier. I'm saying it reeks, sir, Greer replied flatly. He inclined his head ever so slightly towards IT. We both know this kind of bait doesn't get hung twice unless someone wants it to. For a moment, silence pooled heavily between them, broken only by the low hum of encrypted feeds cycling through layers of veil ciphers. When Connor spoke again, his tone was a shade quieter and more deliberate. Theta 9 status? Off-grid, Greer answered immediately. Medically cleared for recovery only. Still under veil escort. He didn't look toward the closed door behind him where Vec was standing watch outside Marin's room, and Jared was never far from Marin's side. But the weight of his presence was felt, all the same. No exposure, no names, not even a call sign. Connors nodded slowly, his lips pressing thin, and yet they knew where she'd be on Collier. Could have been a coincidence, OT said, though his tone lacked conviction. It could have been an intel leak. His eyes locked with Greer's. Or it could have been one of ours staring us right where they wanted. Greer didn't blink. He didn't break his stare. Could be, he murmured. And until we know, we treat every scrap of intel like it's carrying a tripwire. Connor's gaze hardened. Druckenwell Op is being built as a counter-raid. On paper, it's clean. Plausible, even. There's no lever I can pull to scrub it without lighting up questions Fleet doesn't need right now. There was a heavier pause this time. We need proof before I can put names to this. Greer exhaled through his nose, a quiet signal Vec would have read instantly for frustration contained. You'll have your proof, he said, his voice as flat as the stone they stood on. One way or another. IT tapped a fingertip on the table, 3 quick beats in a pattern Marin had once recognized from old Marine code. Watch your flank. It was meant for Greer as much as Connor's. So the op stands, IT said, pulling the thread taut. What's our play? Connor's gaze flickered between them both. Theta 9 remained shadowed. She's not on this op. Full stop. If whoever pulled Collier's strings thinks they can use her again, they'll be hunting for signs she's in the fight. We'll give them nothing. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping even lower. But I want eyes on every whisper that crosses your boards, every sudden tip-off, every corridor shuffle. If we're being steered again, I want to know before the ambush fires. Understood, Greer said, his tone flat and final. He didn't add what they were all thinking. The first ambush had nearly cost them more than they could bear. There wouldn't be a second if he could help it. Connor's projection flickered as he secured the line under yet another layer of encryption, the last words a low growl in the sealed room. Stay dark. Keep Theta 9 safe. And Greer, trust no one you don't have eyes on. The feed cut, leaving the war room steeped in silence and the soft crackle of the hearth behind them. For a long moment, none of them moved. Finally, ITA shifted, muttering under his breath. Feels like we're standing on glass. He straightened, his jaw set. I'll take the first sweep outside. Keep your eyes open until we know who's pulling these criffing threads. Greer gave a single sharp nod, his gaze locked on the now dark, hollow feed, a weight settling heavily in his gut. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the wind had shifted, and every instinct told him Druckenwell was where the next shadow would fall. I just realized I haven't done eye drops either, so first break, I'm doing eye drops. I am a hot mess today, sorry. Speaking of. At least I think I have some. Somewhere. Yeah, I'm totally a hot mess right now. Oh dear. Somewhere I have eye drops, but I'll find them. I'm sure they're clicking around somewhere. Anyway. I know I have them. I know they exist. It's just a matter of where I put them. Fractured, calm. Durza Estate, lower levels. The training circle. The mountain breathed in silence, its ancient stone holding centuries of secrets and scars. Down in the lower levels of the Durza Estate, where the ceilings were high and the air carried the faint tang of iron and earth, the training circle lay in patient stillness. Its surface was worn smooth, every groove and scuff speaking of years of practice. Blades drawn, feints tested, lessons passed down from warrior to warrior. Along one side, the wall opened into a narrow lattice of disguised windows and air channels, allowing the cool breath of evening to spill in. It carried the scent of pine from the slopes below and the low, distant echo of the wind moving through the mountain's ridges. Marin stood barefoot at the edge of the circle, her soft gray tunic loose about her shoulders, dark trousers tucked just above her ankles. Her hair, damp from a recent shower, clung in faint waves to her neck. The fabric of her clothes was chosen for comfort, not for presentation, the kind that wouldn't catch on the steel-healing burns that mottled her arms and legs. A faint sheen of salve clung to the edges of old cuts, catching the dim light like dew on withered leaves. She breathed out slowly, closed her eyes, trying to still the tremor in her hands. Jared was close, as he always was these days. Sitting cross-legged just inside the circle, his boots off, his posture loose but ready. His blonde hair caught the muted light from the mountain vents, his blue eyes steady on her, not as a sentry, not a hawk about to strike, but a presence as unmistakable as a stone beneath their feet. He was quiet reassurance in human form. He didn't press her to start, he didn't need to. He knew she would. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes, my friend. Greer was further back, leaning against one of the support pillars that framed the circle's entrance, his arms folded, his silhouette half in shadow. Watching. Always watching. His eyes tracked Marion's every movement the way a soldier reads a battlefield. Not to judge, not to intrude, but to ensure no unseen threat ever got too close. Even now, even here, his presence was the same, a shield standing between Marin and the rest of the galaxy. Wordless and absolute. She drew a long, slow breath, her bare feet curling against the stone. The memory of Collier was still raw beneath her skin. The duel, the Force user strikes burning through her armor, the crack of her visor shattering, the taste of blood on her tongue. Every time she tried to center herself, it came back. The searing weight of power colliding with power, a predator's focus singling her out among 30 other people. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting Jared's gaze, the unspoken words hanging in the quiet air between them. Steady, he said softly, as though reading her thoughts, his voice pitched low enough that it seemed meant only for her. Breathe. Don't force it. Just breathe. She swallowed and nodded, the motion tight as if the tension in her neck had taken root. She lifted her arms slowly, the movements deliberate to avoid pulling at the healing burns along her forearms. The opening posture of the kata came haltingly, like a memory revisited after too long. Her muscles protested, a faint ache running down her ribs, but she held the posture, forcing herself to stand in the stance her father had once drilled into her on this very floor. She could almost hear his voice and smell the old leather of his gloves as he guided her grip. Jared rose silently and moved closer, his posture mirroring hers, a quiet presence at her side. He shifted his weight just enough for her to notice. "You're leaning," he murmured, a faint warmth in his tone that undercut the correction. "Trust your center. You've got this, Marin." She exhaled sharply, a small, half-strangled laugh escaping her lips. "Feels like I've got nothing," she admitted, her voice low, cracking just enough to betray the weight beneath. "Everything's frayed, like if I push too hard it all comes apart." He tilted his head, meeting her eyes when she finally glanced his way. "Then don't push," he said. "We're not here to win anything. We're just here to remember that you can stand." Her jaw tightened, but she nodded slowly, letting the words settle into the noise of her own thoughts. She stepped into the first movement of the kata again, slower this time, letting the familiar flow guide her limbs. Jared mirrored her pace, not as a teacher, not even as a guard, but as a companion on the same path. Their movements became a quiet rhythm, boots bare feet against stone, breath against breath, the mountain itself bearing witness. Oops. Minutes passed like that, the silence punctuated only by their synchronized steps. Until, finally, Marin's breath hitched and she froze, her eyes clouding over. A flicker of memory slammed into her, the Death Watch woman's blade catching hers, the sudden twist of the Force slamming her into the dirt. pain blooming sharply as fire in her chest. Her knees trembled as the phantom echo ran through her limbs unbidden. Jared was already moving, closing the distance between them and his hand hovering near her elbow, but he didn't touch. "Hey," he murmured, quietly but firmly, anchoring her back to the here and now. "Not there. Here. Just stone under your feet. Just me." She blinked, swallowed hard, and gave a sharp, shaky nod. "Just you," she whispered, her voice unsteady. She let herself match his breathing until the tremor in her hands dulled, until the ghost of Collier receded enough for her to move again. From the shadows, Greer's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. He didn't say a word, he didn't step forward, but he shifted his stance just enough that his boots scraped the floor, a quiet sound she would hear and know. Not alone. I'm gonna pause right there because we're about to be an ad. Alright, sorry about the delay, my friends. I did eventually find some. They were not where they should have been. But I did find some. Alright. Of course, now I gotta clean the glasses. There we go. They finished the kata together, slowly and deliberately, ending in the mirrored bow toward the mountain's wall. Marin's breath came shallow, a sheen of sweat on her brow, but her spine stayed straight as she lowered her arms to her sides. Jared lingered close, a solid wall of quiet reassurance. She shared a small smile. It was fleeting but real. "I'll get there," she said softly, as if promising it to herself as much as to him. "You already are," Jared replied simply, his blue eyes steady and sure. Greer finally spoke from his post, his voice a low rumble in the dimness. "That's enough for tonight," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, but carrying no edge of command either. Just care, hidden under years of marine habit. "Come on, kid, let's get you upstairs before your legs give out." Marin hesitated only a moment before nodding, and gathering herself as Jared offered his hand, not to guide, but to share the weight if she needed it. Between them, under the mountain's silent watch, they left the training circle behind. The stone floor held their fading footsteps, a quiet witness to the long road still ahead. Man, I don't know about you guys, but this is where it gets real. You'll understand as we go along. It gets a little gets a little intense from here. Yeah, that's the thing. Sorry, I was reading a comment from one of my mods. Yeah. We're serious here, focus, okay. The unspoken oath. Marin's room, early evening. The mountain dusk had settled heavily over the Durza estate, clinging to the carved stone walls like quiet sentinels. Down the main corridor, the soft glow of lanterns spilled from sconces cut into the rock, painting long lines of gold across the polished stone floor. Beyond the open terrace windows, the distant forest whispered under the wind, but inside, everything felt still. Too still. Marin sat on the edge of her bunk, the soft gray tunic loose on her shoulders, the dark trousers gathered at her knees. Her bare feet rested flat against the cool stone floor, her toes curled slightly as if to ground herself. The day's exertion had taken its toll. Training in the lower circle with Jared had left her exhausted, but the quiet refused to leave her head. Veil or not, the weight of memory gnawed at the edges, leaving her hands clenched faintly in the fabric of her tunic. The muted sound of boots approaching drew her attention to the door. They weren't Jared's. His stride was lighter and quieter, but measured, purposeful, and familiar in a way that made her chest tighten before the knock came. "Door's open," Marin said softly, her voice carrying only as far as it needed to. The door pushed inward on quiet hinges. Aran Werda stepped through, his dark, mottled green armor dulled by time and use, his helmet tucked under his arm. The man had that look about him he always carried, like the world had already tried to break him once and he wasn't about to let it try again. Those green eyes found hers immediately, a flicker of relief masked beneath his usual reserved manner. "I figured you might not be sleeping yet," he said, his voice low and roughened by the long day's travel. He closed the door behind him and set his helmet on the table against the wall, crossing his arms loosely over his chest. Marin gave a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, I haven't been sleeping much lately." Her gaze fell to the floor for a moment and then flicked back to him. You came all the way up here just to see me? Someone's got to, Aran replied simply, pushing off the wall to step closer. Rare and the others would have dragged me up by my collar plate if I hadn't. A faint grin tugged at his mouth before it faded again, his tone sobering. Truth is, I needed to see for myself that you're still in one piece. Mirren glanced down at her hands, twisting the hem of her sleeve. That makes two of us, she murmured. It feels like every time I think I've got both feet under me, something comes along to take a swing. Aran crouched, enough to catch her gaze head on. Yeah, well, you're still standing. That counts for more than you think. His eyes softened a fraction, that fierce protectiveness he tried to keep buried rising to the surface once more. Jared told me you were pushing hard in the training circle earlier. Mirren shrugged one shoulder. Trying to feel like myself again. Her voice cracked slightly before she forced it steady. I can't afford to hesitate next time. Marika, Aran said quietly, the name foreign on his tongue but heavy with meaning because he'd learned it from Ethan. You've got nothing to prove. Not to me, not to Greer, not to Ethan or anyone else. I saw you on Korriban, remember? I watched you fight with one hand on with your ribs a mess, and you wouldn't let anyone drag you out until Rhaenys was clear. He shook his head. You've already proved more than most will in a lifetime. Her breath hitched faintly, but she didn't look away this time. Bastine wasn't that different, she admitted after a long pause, the words trembling but deliberate. Except this time, I fought. Her thumb drifted to Jarius's tags, pressing them tightly into her palm, but it still felt too close. Aran's jaw worked for a moment, his green eyes flicking with a quiet, familiar anger, not at her, but at the ghost they both carried. I know, he said, his voice hoarse. I know what they're capable of, and if I had my way, no one would ever lay a hand on you like that again. Oof. Sorry. His fists clenched once and then relaxed. You're not alone in this fight, Aaron. You've got me. You've got Jared. You've got all of us. Silence stretched between them, heavy, but not suffocating, until Marin reached out and gripped his wrist. Thanks, Aran, she whispered. He covered her hand with his own, his rough gauntlet brushing her bruised skin. Always, he said simply, the word like a vow. He didn't try to offer platitudes, he just stayed there, grounding her the same way he had on Korriban when the dust had finally settled, and all they'd had left was pain and stubborn breath. After a long moment, he squeezed her hand and stood. I'll head out at first light, he said, glancing toward the window where the mountain winds whispered against the stone. The colony needs me, but you ever call, I'll drop everything. You know that, right? Marin nodded, her lips pressed thin to keep emotion from spilling out. I know, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Aran inclined his head, a soldier's promise, in that simple gesture, and then retrieved his helmet and slipped out the door as quietly as he'd come. Marin sat in silence long after he'd gone, her hands still curled where his had been, her heart steadier. Silent vows. Main corridor, late evening. The stone corridors of the estate held their own kind of hush at night, the silence broken only by the occasional sigh of mountain wind threading through narrow air channels. Lantern light stretched long shadows over the worn flagstones, casting the carved walls in muted amber and soft gray. The atmosphere here was never sterile like a barracks or a ship's corridor. It had the quiet weight of home, the kind that settled in your bones. Aran slipped out of Marin's room, helmet under one arm, his boots soundless despite the stoned floor. He hadn't said everything he'd wanted to in her room. The truth was, some of it couldn't be said, but he'd seen enough. He'd seen the way her hands had gripped Jarius's tags, the set of her shoulders, caught somewhere between defiance and exhaustion. It mirrored memories he wished neither of them carried. The soft scrape of motion brought his gaze up. Greer leaned casually against the wall just outside Marin's door, his arms folded, his posture deceptively loose. But Aran knew better. The man's presence wasn't casual. It was watchful, the kind of quiet vigilance only honed through too many missions where hesitation meant someone didn't make it home. For a long moment, the two men regarded each other. No salutes, no words. The air between them held a language older than rank, or words themselves. Greer's eyes flicked once toward Marin's door, toward what lay behind it, a silent question. Aran answered with the barest tilt of his head. She's holding on, but only just. His jaw tightened as he added a faint shrug, a motion that wasn't casual so much as frustrated. You know what this cost her. Greer's gaze darkened and his hand shifted just slightly on his folded arm, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes to someone who understood Veil protocol. I saw it. Bastine. We swore this wouldn't happen again. His look slid away briefly as if to steady himself. When it returned, it was flint hard. We're not failing her twice. Aran exhaled through his nose, barely a breath, and dipped his chin in a single deliberate nod. Not on my watch. Not ever. Only then did words surface, low enough to keep from disturbing the room behind them. She's got good people watching her, Aran said, his voice rough-edged but steady. Not many like you were left in this galaxy. Greer's mouth quirked, though it wasn't anywhere near a smile. Just doing my job, he muttered. But there was weight under the words, the kind shared only between those who'd hauled too many wounded friends out of hellholes to count. Aran met his gaze, something like understanding passing between them. Yeah, he said quietly. Me too. The silence after was thick, but not uncomfortable. Two men who'd never fought side by side before, Bastine, yet they carried the same oath carved into their very bones. Both had seen Marin bloodied, burned, broken, and somehow still standing. Both knew that every time she walked into the fire again, the odds were stacked higher against her. Finally, Greer straightened from the wall just enough to clasp Aran's forearm, in a warrior's grip more binding than any formal promise. Ash clearance or not, he said under his breath. You need anything for her. You don't ask twice. You come to me. Aran's hand tightened on his. Same goes for you, brother. They released the grip, and without another word, Aran turned toward the main stairwell leading to the outer courtyard where his speeder waited. Greer waited until the man disappeared into the deeper shadows of the estate, his posture never fully easing. Only when the last sound of Aran's boots faded did he glance back to Marin's door. A fraction of his stance shifted, just enough to read as a silent vow. Nothing gets past me. Not this time. And then he resumed his watch, the quiet of the mountain settling heavy once more. So I know I said my streams were going to be 2.5 hours. We'll see how long this takes, because these are, well, this chapter's only 17 pages. Yeah. Well, okay, so they're not 20, so maybe. We'll find out. Okay. A healer's touch. The room was dim, mountain dawn held at bay by heavy curtains and the muted stone of the estate walls. Marin sat propped against a mound of soft pillows, the thin gray linen of her sleep tunic loose against healing skin. Her legs curled close to her for warmth. The tray Greer had insisted she finish sat on the bedside table, only half touched despite her earlier promises. Jared sat on the floor beside her bunk, cross-legged, his pale blue eyes fixed on her with quiet patience. He didn't press. He didn't try to pry her thoughts loose. But the undercurrent between them, the faint thread of the force they both had been trained to weave, carried impressions she wasn't ready to put into words. Pain that wasn't just physical, a knot of memory too raw to handle yet. The soft click of the latch broke the stillness. Callista slipped inside, her blonde hair tied back loosely, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a small container of healing salve in one hand and a folded cloth in the other. Her eyes, blue and clear as the mountain sky outside, swept over Marin before settling on Jared. She'd caught the flicker of his thoughts, the tiniest shift of a finger against his knee. A signal, veil-born and force-shaded both. She's holding back. She won't speak of it aloud. Callista answered with the barest tilt of her head, acknowledging before setting the salve down on the bedside table. "Good morning, Marika," she said softly, crouching beside the bunk, her quieter than usual. Her tone was light. A little warmth threaded through it, but the weight beneath it was unmistakable. She dipped a corner of the cloth into the salve and gestured gently toward Marin's arm. "May I?" Marin nodded slowly, lowering her gaze to her hands. "I'm fine," she murmured, but the rough edge to her voice betrayed her. Jared's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak, letting the bond between them press that truth toward Callista instead. "Fine doesn't look like this," Callista said quietly, reaching to take Marin's hand with surprising gentleness. She turned it over, the pale sheen of scarred skin and faintly raw patches visible against the early morning light. "You're healing well, but you're still hurting. Let me help." There was no protest, just the faintest tremble in Marin's fingers as Callista began to smooth the salve over the angry red marks on her arm, working with practiced care. The silence stretched between them until Marin broke it, her voice no louder than a whisper. "I remember pieces, flashes, holier, but it's like Bastine all over again." Her breath caught, needles under my skin. "I can't move, just waiting." Jared's hand shifted slightly on his knee. A warning, a quiet request that Callista tread softly. But the older woman was already leaning closer, her free hand steadying Marin's wrist, her voice low and sure. "No one will ever leave you like that again, Marika. Not while we're breathing, not while Ethan and I have anything to say about it. You hear me?" Marin blinked hard, a tear slipping unbidden down her cheek, and nodded once. The force between her and Jared flickered, a pulse of sorrow and unspoken fear. He reached up to rest his fingers lightly over hers where Callista still worked, adding his own steady presence. "You're safe here." The thought brushed gently across her mind, not spoken, not pressed, just offered. Callista glanced at Jared briefly, caught a silent message in the smallest shift of his eyes. "She's not telling you how much is haunting her." Callista's jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't push. Instead, she finished treating the burn along Marin's arm and reached for the other, letting the quiet fill the room for a few breaths before she spoke again. "When you're ready," Callista said, her voice like a promise, "you tell us everything. We'll listen, and we'll make those Chakari never get near you again. Make sure those Chakari never get near you again. But for now, you just heal. That's all that matters." Marin swallowed hard, nodding again as Jared's fingers tightened over hers for a moment. Between the three of them, the silence shifted. It was less heavy now, less suffocating. Marin let herself lean back into the pillows, not fighting the exhaustion that had begun to creep in. Callista's hand lingered over hers, until her breathing began to even out. Jared met Callista's gaze, the unspoken truth passing between them both. "She's holding it together by threads." "Then we hold them with her," Callista's answering look said, fierce and certain before she reached for the salve again. under watchful shadows. Hallway outside Marin's room. Early morning. The mountain home was quiet, its thick stone walls holding the dawn at bay, the hush of the high halls broken only by the faint shift of boots on polished floors. Outside Marin's room, Vex stood at his post, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his posture casual enough not to alarm, but every line of his posture was watchful. The light from a nearby wall sconce caught on the black insignia stitched into his fatigues. The silent mark of someone who'd lived half his life on veil duty, seeing without being seen. The door opened a crack, and Callista slipped out, closing it gently behind her. She exhaled softly, the tension in her shoulders telling Vec more than words ever could have. He waited until she was a few paces away and then shifted his stance fractionally. Not enough to draw attention, but enough that someone trained to read it would understand. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes, my friends. Fragile, the smallest tilt of his head toward the closed door. Dreams still haunt her. Callista's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. She didn't even nod. She only let her fingers brush lightly against the edge of the table in the hallway, an answering signal. She needs quiet. No more questions today. Beck glanced toward the corner of the hall where a small side table sat beneath a narrow window. His hands drifted to his belt, his fingers resting there briefly on the edge of his datapad holster before flicking twice in practice movement. It was barely visible, but enough. Greer needs to know. From down the hall, a shadow detached itself from the doorway of the war room. Greer's boots made no sound on the stone as he approached, his gaze flicking once to Callista, once to the closed door behind her. He didn't ask. He didn't really need to. Beck's two-finger tap on his belt and then the minute angle of his chin towards Marin's room gave him everything. Welcome in, unnamed... Oh, un-American cheeseburger. Welcome in. Took me a second. Good to see you this evening. I'm glad you're here in chat. My name is Meshla. I am primarily an long-form storyteller and lore crafter, and I am currently reading chapter 16 of one of my stories called Steps into the Past. Welcome in. Please get comfy and enjoy. We have an ad starting in about 3 minutes, my friends. Greer's jaw tightened just a fraction. How bad? The question lived in the slight crook of his finger, the tiniest raise of his brow. Vec's answer was silent, his right thumb dragging slowly across his knuckles. Still trapped in it. Jared is holding the worst of it down, but she's fraying at the edges. Greer absorbed that, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. He glanced once toward the window where dawn was beginning to creep in, and then back to Vec. He gave a minute nod. We keep the net tight. Oh, sorry. Nobody else gets close. Callista lingered only long enough to add a single wordless message of her own. A brief, deliberate pause, her eyes meeting Greer's and then lowering to the floor. This wasn't just Collier haunting her. It's Pestine, too. Her meaning was unmistakable, even unspoken. Greer's face barely shifted, but a faint line deepened at the corner of his mouth. He remembered Pestine too well. The cell, the needles, Ethan carrying Marin out like a broken doll. Finally, Greer leaned in fractionally, one knuckle brushing the frame of Marin's door. Re-rotate watch tighter today. No noise, no visitor she hasn't asked for. This was a statement, not an order. Beck's slight nod was confirmation enough. Without another word, Greer turned, vanishing back into the quiet halls with a soldier's ease, already planning the silent handovers, the adjusted routes for Harris and Rao. Beck remained at his post, settling back into stillness. Every sense stretched toward the room beyond the door. He didn't need to see Marin to know the battle wasn't over yet. Not the kind fought with blades or blasters, but the kind they all feared more. And until she could stand on her own again, they would keep watch. Quiet, invisible, and absolute. I'm gonna stop there because we have an ad starting in about a minute. Alright. I'm also gonna get some water, because this is kind of intense. But welcome in, Un-American Cheeseburger. That is quite the name. I am glad you are here. I do hope that you enjoy the story, and thank you for that interesting piece of information. I'm going to take a little break while we have an ad that is starting in about 8 seconds. Please feel free to take advantage of that minute and a half. Get yourself some water, a snack, or whatever else you need. See you in a bit. Welcome back, my friends. I hope you had a chance to get yourself a drink or a snack. I am trying to keep hydrated since I am reading tonight. Alright. And as always, if you guys have any questions about the story, about the series, or about my process as a writer, please feel free to ask in chat and I will answer them as I'm able to. I always enjoy sharing my knowledge. And I never claim to be an expert because I know that I'm not. So, but I do like to share what I do know. A measure of calm. Desert estate. The mountain gardens. The late morning light spilled softly across the terraces of the Durza estate, muted as it filtered through the sheer mist clinging to the high slopes. A fine breeze whispered off the northern ridges, carrying with it the cool scent of mountain pine and damp stone. The hush here was deliberate. Preserved over generations, these gardens had always been a place for stillness, not for war. Yet every step Marin took felt like the weight of battles past trailing her boots. Even though this morning they were left by the door, bare feet on stone made the ground seem closer, less foreign to her battered body. Jared stayed close, just as he always had since that day they carried her home from Collier's smoke and fire. Not close enough to crowd her, but there, a quiet sentinel at her back, his presence in the force a steady warmth, his silence a kind of promise. He'd long ago learned when to speak and when to simply be near her. This was one of those times when words would have been clumsy. Marin's tunic shifted softly around her frame as she moved, each careful step betraying the lingering ache in her muscles. 10 days since Collier, yet the deep burns across her arms and legs still flared when she pushed too hard. Bacta had knit the flesh and eased the worst of the pain, but her body remembered the lightning, the blows, and the agony that went bone deep. It reminded her now with every slow stretch she dared attempt on the flat expanse of the garden path. Greer leaned against a stone pillar on the upper steps, his posture deceptively relaxed, every line of him reading the grounds, the mountain beyond, and the horizon. He didn't intrude, he didn't hover, but she could feel his gaze as surely as the sun upon her skin, the same watch he'd held since Bastine. Through fire and shadow and long nights where she'd lain too still, and he'd made sure her breath still rose and fell. Marin drew in a slow breath, closing her eyes for a heartbeat longer than comfort allowed. The air here was clean, unmarred by smoke or blood or the iron taste of fear. She held on to that, trying to breathe it deeply, and deeper still, like it might cleanse what the fight on Collier had left in her veins. Jared knelt nearby on the flagstones, his lightsaber lying idle beside him, his hand brushed over the smooth surface of the stone, his fingertips tracing old cracks filled long ago with moss. "You're pushing again," he murmured, his voice low but carrying that edge of gentle insistence only he could manage with her. "I can feel it." Her lips pressed into a thin line before she sighed, a sound equal parts frustration and resignation. "If I stop moving, I'll remember too much," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze drifted to the distant mountains, though she wasn't really seeing them. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there. The heat, the lightning, the weight of her hands trying to burn me through." Her fingers flexed involuntarily, remembering the arcs of blue-white energy crawling over her armor, steering through plates like they were nothing more than sheets of flimsoplast. Jared's eyes softened, his presence a quiet anchor in the force. "Marin, you're here. You're safe," he said, the words shaped with deliberate calm. He didn't reach for her, not yet, but the steady hum of his mind brushed against hers, offering grounding and a way to keep from tumbling into those jagged memories. She swallowed hard, shaking her head faintly. "Safe," she echoed, tasting the word as though unsure of what it meant anymore. Safe never lasted long, did it? Not on Bastine, not on Tanagas when the clearing became a killing ground, and not on Collier when the intel had led them straight into Daryaim. She drew her arms in close, wrapping them tightly around herself, careful of the tender skin beneath the linen sleeves. From his vantage point above, Greer shifted, just enough that Marin caught it out of the corner of her eye. It was a silent signal, the kind only she and Jared understood after years under the veil. "We've got you." There were no words, no motion that would draw attention beyond this mountain, just a quiet reaffirmation of the watch being kept. Jared finally rose, closing the distance between them, his boots silent on the stone. He knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes squarely. "You don't have to outrun what happened," he told her softly, his voice a rough thread of conviction. "Not today. Not while we're here." He glanced once toward the distant peaks, and then back to her, his hand hovering, not quite touching, until she nodded slightly. Only then did his palm settle against hers, grounding her in warmth and the living present. Marin drew a deep breath, letting it out in a shaky exhale, The breeze tugged gently at her hair, carrying away some part of the weight in her chest. For a long time, neither of them moved. The only sound was the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant call of a mountain hawk. And in that fragile calm, with Jared's steady presence before her and Greer's unwavering watch behind, Marin allowed herself one stolen moment of belief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't carrying this war alone. Okay. I'm so glad I found my eye drops. Now my eyeballs will stop hating me, hopefully. Echoes left unspoken. The corridor outside Marin's quarters lay in a hush, dimmed to the faint amber glow of sconces along the stone walls. The estate was quiet this deep in the mountain, even the whisper of mountain air through hidden channels muffled by thick stone and time-worn wood. Outside her door, Greer leaned in his usual post, his arms loosely folded, every line of him at ease to the untrained eye. To anyone who knew him, the stance was far from idle. His weight was balanced on the balls of his feet, listening, watching, every muscle a coiled promise. Jared stepped out of Marin's room, closing the wooden door softly behind him. His blonde hair caught the low light, his eyes pale and unsettled. For a long moment he lingered there as if the air carried more weight than it should, and then he moved, his boots making no sound against the worn rug underfoot. Greer's head tilted a fraction, just enough to acknowledge him. His gaze asked the question neither of them voiced. Jared answered it with a barely perceptible shift of his hand, brushing his thumb along the seam of his trousers once, twice, a signal they'd both learned from the Marines. She's sleeping, but it's thin. Greer's jaw flexed once, a tick of muscle that spoke of recognition, not surprise. His hand shifted fractionally against his bicep, a slow downward pass. Keep steady watch. Jared glanced toward the far end of the hall where a Veil Marine sat unobtrusively in a chair, Harris pretending to check a datapad. His eyes swept back to Greer, a single raised brow questioning the other unspoken matter that lingered between them. The wrong scent of the whole collier op, the way two names followed Marin like a shadow that didn't belong. Greer didn't speak. He rarely did these days. Instead, two fingers tapped his own forearm once, an imperceptible gesture to anyone who wasn't cleared. Eyes on them. A breath, nearly inaudible. Doesn't smell right. Jared gave the slightest nod, his mouth tight, his eyes flicking toward the closed door behind him. Marin's presence bled faintly through the force, restless even in sleep. No, he said quietly, just enough for Greer to hear. It doesn't. The words carried far more than their surface meaning. There was silence again, the kind that lived deep in the bones of Marines who'd spent too long on the edges of firefights and veil ops. Both understood what wasn't being said. This was still a battlefield, even here in the safety of the estate. Intel change shouldn't have led them into that trap on Collier. The way Halloran had been close enough to walk her to medical, the way Dance seemed to map every shadow of Veil protocol without having clearance, it all reeked of something festering beneath the surface. Greer's eyes met Jared's, steady as bedrock. A slight tilt of his chin towards Marin's room meant only one thing. Whatever it is, keep it far from her door. Jared nodded once, slow and deliberate, accepting the charge as he had back in the clearing on Tanagas, and like he would again. Without another word, he shifted, taking up a silent perch against the opposite wall where he could watch both Greer and the door. Greer's gaze flicked back down the hall, returning to the long watch with the patience of a man who knew that sometimes survival depended not on the noise you made, but on how still you could stay while the storm passed. The estate settled into quiet again, but between them, the unspoken weight of Collier, of shadows in their own ranks, coiled like a live wire waiting to strike. Okay. Yeah, this is I told you this is going to be intense. Okay, I did give you warning. The quiet, calm northern mountains, the Durza estate war room. The war room hummed with quiet, a sound born of deep encryption relays and the low, rhythmic pulse of the mountain's environmental systems buried far below the surface. The shutters stayed closed against the evening light, sealing them into shadow and stone. A pocket of silence cut off from the world outside. A single table dominated the center of the room, guard Dur still beneath a faint hollow map projections with chairs pushed back in an uneven disarray, as though every occupant was more used to standing when decisions like this came down. Marin stood at parade rest at the far end of the table, her boots square, her plain black fatigues stark against the dim lighting. Even 12 days out from Collier, there was a tightness to her frame, the coiled set of her shoulders like someone who hadn't been given enough time to heal, or who hadn't allowed herself to. The only mark on her was the single black chevron stitched to her collar. There was no name tape, no unit patch, nothing else to say she belonged to anyone. Greer leaned on one corner of the table, his fingers resting on the encrypted console, waiting for the veil channel to complete its multi-step clearance. Vec, Harris, and Raoul stood close by, not quite at ease, but not moving either, their quiet presence an anchor of familiarity. Jared lingered near the doorway, silent and watchful. Ethan stood opposite Greer, his helmet under one arm, his expression unreadable but unmistakably taut. The comms array finally locked with a low chime, veil protocols layering themselves over the connection like iron shutters. The hollow flared to life above the console, throwing Admiral Connor's weathered face into sharp relief. There was no preamble, no wasted words. His eyes found Marin's first, holding for a heartbeat before scanning the room and registering each present. Asset Theta 9, Connor said, his tone clipped, unprofessional but not unfeeling. Orders incoming, situation classified under Directive Talon 7. Immediate reactivation required. Marin's jaw tightened, but she gave a sharp nod. Sir. Connors drew a slow breath, as though weighing every syllable. A potential hostile cell has been reported operating in a contested sector. Intel suggests civilian leverage. Your detachment will deploy to support groundside ops under existing command structure. Rotation assignment is temporary but non-optional. You depart aboard Kerr at 0600. The unspoken hung between the words. Everyone in the room could feel it, a leaden weight settling over their shoulders. There was no need to say who would push this intel or how many times they'd been burned before. Greer straightened, his voice rough like gravel dragged over steel. Admiral, with respect, Theta 9 isn't 12 days clear of Collier, you know it. So does the chain that fed this op. You really want to walk her straight back into the field under those conditions? Connor's eyes hardened. But there was no bite in his answer. I know, Master Sergeant. I've delayed this as long as possible. Any further pushback would draw more eyes than I can afford. This is the cleanest deployment window we're going to get. He glanced at Marin again and then back to Greer. She won't be marked. No name, no rank, no identifiers. Her armor is going to be stripped bare. Understand? Marin shifted her weight slightly, her eyes locked on the Admiral's image. Sir, You want me to go in silent but visible enough to sell the lie? Is that it? Her voice was level, but there was an edge beneath it. A tone forged in the gap between duty and the hard memories that Collier hadn't yet loosened from her mind. Connors didn't flinch. That's exactly it. Your presence gives the op legitimacy. If anyone tries to run this from behind the curtain, you'll draw them out. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low, the deep rumble of restrained fury. And if the last time wasn't a lesson, if this turns into another ambush, another kill box? Connor's gaze flicked to him, weight in every syllable that he spoke next. Then I trust you've trained her to survive it. And I trust Greer to bring her back. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. The men around the table shifted slightly, like soldiers bracing for orders they'd known were coming but had prayed to the lady not to hear. Never to hear. Marin exhaled slowly, forcing herself to meet Connor's gaze head-on. Understood, sir. A beat, quieter now. A question she already knew the answer to. This isn't a clean op, is it? Connor's eyes softened just a fraction, and then the steel slammed back into place. No, but it's necessary. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into a lower cadence meant only for those veil cleared on this line. Watch for outside interference. Don't trust data from Overwatch without cross-check. Extraction priority, civilians first, your detachment second. If you have to cut the line to get out, do it. Talon 7 holds. Greer nodded once. A silent copy that said more than words would have. Vec shifted his weight, glancing at Marin, Harris, and Ral in turn. They all understood. This wasn't a mission. It was a test. And a trap. Connors let the silence linger a moment longer, his eyes finding Marin once more. Theta 9, keep your head down. Don't let them see more than they're meant to. Marin's throat felt dry, but her reply was steady. Aye, sir. The hollow flickered once and cut out, the veil band cycling back into dead air. The room felt heavier for its absence. Ethan set his helmet down on the table with a deliberate weight, his voice quiet but sharp. You might as well have said it outright. This is bait. Greer didn't argue. He looked at Marin, his gaze hard, but not unkind. We move at 04. Armor stripped, matte plates only. You stay on my 6 until I say otherwise. Understood? Marin met his stare, letting the weight of it anchor her even as something inside felt like it was fraying. Understood, Master Sergeant. Jared didn't speak, but his eyes stayed on hers. In the quiet tilt of his head and the faint tightening of his jaw, she read the silent vow again. I'll watch from here. You won't be alone. Not even out there. The room stayed still for a long time after that. The only sound was the low hum of the encrypted systems and the whisper of mountain winds against the rock outside, as if the planet itself held its breath. When the wind goes still, you check your footing. There's a creed, Maxim 22. Quiet does not always mean safety. Sometimes it is the pause before impact, the moment when the world seems to hold its breath. A seasoned warrior does not mistake calm for peace. They ground themselves, take stock, and prepare without panic. Readiness is not loud, it is steady, deliberate, and patient enough to wait for the storm it knows is coming. And that, my friends, is chapter 16. Well, that took like an hour and a half. I don't know, what do you guys think? That's only the first of 2 chapters we're going to read tonight. I did warn you, it was going to get intense. So, hopefully I haven't scared anybody away yet. I hope not. We're not done yet. We still have another chapter to go. I don't know about you, but my pulse is like, and I'm the one reading this, okay? My pulse is like crazy right now. Yeah. So sometimes we're cozy, but definitely not tonight. Sorry. But anyway, try to be cozy. Get a blanket, get a snack, get some tea, some water. You know, it's story time. Supposed to be cozy, even if what we're reading is not. Oh dear. Frosty must be 10x, full of bad ideas and regret that have hardened into a grisly exterior and a sick, twisted sense of humor, as it should be. 10x? Eh? A long history of bad ideas makes for good stories, and a sharp sense of humor keeps the archives from getting too dusty. I mean, Frosty isn't wrong. I mean, you can't really argue with that. But sometimes. We have an ad starting in 4 minutes and 23 seconds. I can start reading the next scene if you want. Yeah, but I'll have to pause. Okay. Actually, this is the start of chapter 17, so we have an ad starting in 4 minutes and 4 seconds. Steps into the past, chapter 17, before the fall. Okay. Stripped of name. Northern Mountains, the Durza Estate. Lower level armory. The armory was silent, save for the soft hiss of pressurized seals releasing and the occasional muted scrape of metal on metal as gear was checked, rechecked, and stacked in neat utilitarian rows. The lighting here was low, washed in dull amber that painted every weapon rack, every storage case, in muted tones of fatigue and war-worn resolve. It smelled of oil, Durasteel, and the faint tang of ozone from the weapons bench where Jared knelt, his head bowed over Marin's lightsaber. Marin stood just beyond him, her boots planted on the scuffed stone floor, a standard-issue duffel packed at her feet. Her fatigues were plain black, the sleeves rolled, the collar empty where the rank tabs usually sat. She felt hollow inside the fabric, as if every stitch had been sewn to remind her she was being stripped of something. A name, a past, a home, everything except the orders waiting at dawn. Jared looked up from the saber, his pale blue eyes catching in the dim light. Hidden latch, he said quietly, his voice even but laced with something more, a thread of worry too sharp to mask. He held the saber out to her, now fitted with a secondary holster meant to clip inside the unmarked armor's plating. No one sees this unless you choose to draw it. Understood. Marin took it carefully, feeling the weight of the weapon settle into her palm. Understood. Her voice was low, but there was grit to it, the kind that only came from holding on too hard to a center that kept threatening to slip. She secured the saber where he indicated, testing the latch twice. It disappeared beneath the loose fatigues, silent and unseen. Ethan leaned against the doorway, his arms folded, watching every motion. He hadn't said much since Connor's call, but his eyes spoke volumes, a quiet, unrelenting watchfulness honed by years of knowing what bad ops looked like before they ever left the ground. On the bench to her right, the memorial braid rested like a wound unraveling, its thread dulled by grief and time. She hesitated before reaching for it, her fingers brushing the weave once, twice, as though memorizing its feel. You can't take it, Ethan said softly from the doorway. It wasn't an order, simply a truth. I know. The words stuck in her throat. She set the braid down gently. It doesn't feel right to leave it. It doesn't feel right to bring it, either, Jared murmured, checking the kit list he'd laid out on the table. A standard med pack, a field ration tube, spare ammo cells, 2 knives with no engraving, and 1 sidearm with no serial mark. The kind of kit you could disappear with. Or be erased in. Marin swallowed hard and zipped the duffel closed. Guess nothing about this feels right. Ethan stepped in then, settling a battered matte black helmet on the table beside her gear. There were no sigils. There was no scarring that marked it as hers. Just another faceless piece of marine armor pulled from Greer's reserve stores. Greer rated the quartermaster, he said, his voice gruff but quiet. And I'm gonna stop there because we have an ad starting right about now. Go get yourself a snack. See you in a minute and a half. And we are back, my friend. I'm gonna back up a couple of sentences just for anybody's benefit who might have lost half the sentence due to the ad starting. Ethan stepped in then, setting a battered matte black helmet on the table beside her gear. There were no sigils. There were no scarring that marked it as hers. It was just another faceless piece of marine armor pulled from Greer's reserve stores. Greer raided the quartermaster, he said, his voice gruff but quiet. Old stock, no tags, no unit patch. Only he and IT will know what that kit means. He tapped the helmet once, solid and certain. The rest won't see you at all. She met his brown eyes, a flicker of dark humor trying to surface and dying before it reached her lips. Invisible target, she said, shouldering the duffel. Feels safer already. Welcome in to Sniper. Good to see you. Sorry, I went live at 6 and forgot to tell people. Oh dear. Jared zipped the last pouch on her duffel, his hand lingering there a moment longer than necessary. A silent anchor he didn't know how to give voice to. When he finally looked up, his tone was low and steady, a promise wrapped in steel. You'll come back. You hear me? Thanks for the shout out, Wraith. Appreciate you. Marin nodded. Just once, because anything more might break the control she was barely holding. Yeah, she whispered, though it felt like a lie they both needed. Ethan shifted closer, one hand resting briefly on her shoulder, grounding her in the only way he knew how. Stay sharp. Trust Greer. Trust your gut before you trust their intel. And, his voice dropped, quiet enough only she could hear. Remember, there's nothing out there worth losing yourself to just to finish the job. Not anymore. Alright. She let out a slow breath, her eyes closing for just a moment, holding on to that before letting go. The kit felt heavier when she picked it up, but her back straightened under its weight. No braid, no tags, no name. Just another marine-shaped shadow walking into a mission already half buried in silence. From the far hall, Greer's voice came clipped and firm as ever. 04, Data 9. Prep for lift. Marin glanced once at the memorial braid lying coiled on the bench, and then turned and walked out to meet whatever waited beyond the dawn. I don't know about you guys, but, yeah. Please let me know your thoughts in chat, even if you just came in. Shadows in transit. The pre-dawn sky was a washed-out gray, clouds lying low and heavy over the mountains like a second ceiling waiting to fall. The only light came from the estate's perimeter relays, muted amber glows spaced along the tree line and the faint, low pulse of a cloaked shuttle breaking through the mist above. There were no running lights. There was no call sign. Just a shape cut from darker shadow as it settled toward the landing pad with a whisper of repulsors barely audible over the mountain wind. Greer stood near the edge of the pad, full combat harness on, his helmet clipped to his belt, his posture as straight as a rifle barrel. His expression was the Marines recognized instantly. Mission mode. Every line of his posture set to efficiency and focus. Even his breath seemed timed to the heartbeat of the op. Marin approached from the estate steps, her duffel slung over her shoulder, helmet under one arm, and moving like a shadow without a name. Jared ghosted at her side, quiet, steady, a presence meant to anchor her through every step she didn't want to take. Ethan trailed half a pace behind, his arms folded but his eyes locked on Greer, a silent exchange passing between them that spoke of trust, tempered by wariness. Greer's gaze flicked over Marin once, cataloging everything. The plain fatigues, the absence of braid or tags, the slight tremor in her finger she thought she'd hidden when she adjusted the strap of her duffel. He didn't comment, just gave a short, sharp nod. "Vector's green," he said, his voice low but carrying. "We keep it dark all the way to Cure. From there, IT takes over. No names, no unnecessary identifiers, just enough to set the board." Marin returned the nod, her jaw tight. "Understood." Jared's eyes lingered on her, the force a steady thread between them. He didn't need to speak. He pushed calm toward her, a silent promise wrapped in warmth and stubborn loyalty. She glanced his way once, and the tightness in her stance eased by a fraction. The shuttle touched down with a muted hiss as the landing struts locked in place. The ramp lowered slowly, deliberately quiet. Greer raised 2 fingers in a short, tight gesture, a veiled command Jared and Marin had both seen before. No chatter. Eyes open. Follow my lead. Ethan stepped closer to Marin, lowering his voice until it was for her ears alone. "You keep your head down, Marika. Not one move you don't trust." His gaze flicked to Greer and then back. "I'll have words with Connors when this is over." She met his eyes and gave the faintest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't," she murmured. "This is bigger than either of us right now." "Doesn't mean I let it go," he said. But there was no heat in it, only quiet, unyielding care. He touched 2 fingers briefly to the dome of her helmet before stepping back. A Katani gesture that was old and protective. Jared turned to her then, his hand brushing hers for a breath before pulling back. The barest touch meant to tether her without breaking veil discipline. "I'll be here when you get back," he said softly. The force carried more than words. His determination, his refusal to leave her lost in the silence they were about to walk her into. Marin swallowed hard and nodded once. "I know." Greer caught a glance over his shoulder, the briefest flick of his fingers signaling time. Marin drew in a long breath, squared her shoulders, and followed Greer up the ramp. The shuttle's interior was dim, stripped of any insignia like everything else on this mission. 3 unmarked crates lined the side bulkhead, armor, weapons, and extra kit. The hum of its systems was low, constant, and like a heartbeat in the dark. Greer said nothing more as the ramp sealed behind them. He motioned to the crates with a curt tilt of his head. "Suit up." She set her duffel down and unclipped the helmet, her hands working mechanically as she opened the first crate. Matte black plating, the edges dulled. No sigils, no name, no past, just weight and silence. Piece by piece, she locked it in place, chestplate, band braces, greaves. Each clasp clicked home as another layer of herself was sealed away. Jared remained at the base of the ramp, visible through the narrow viewport, his posture still, his presence a steady beacon she could feel even through the hull. Ethan stood beside him, one hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, scanning the tree line out of habit, but his focus never left the shuttle until the last second. As Marin slid the helmet into place, the heads-up display flickered to life with only the barest essentials. She looked once toward the viewport, meeting Jared's gaze across the distance. There were no words, just a silent exchange. Stay alive. Come home. Greer keyed the comm to the pilot, his voice low and professional. Vector black. Lift when ready. The shuttle rose on a whisper of repulsors, vanishing into the cloud cover, leaving only footprints on the landing pad and below and 3 figures watching the sky until it swallowed the last trace of its passage. Sorry, friends. I need water again. The transfer was silent. DSS Cure contained shipyards. Secure Vale Hangar Bay. Here was a looming shadow against the lights of the shipyards, a Katani destroyer wrapped in the home of dormant power and disciplined quiet. The Vale shuttle drifted in under cloak, its transponders masked, its thrusters a muted whisper in the void. Only one hangar was lit for arrival, the rest of the deck sealed and cleared under Connor's direct order hours before launch. The deck crews didn't know why, they didn't ask. Some orders came with weight enough to press down on a man's chest, and this was one of them. The shuttle locked into its landing cradle with barely a shudder. The ramp hissed open. Greer descended first, every line of him sharp as a blade, scanning the bay before signaling the all clear with 2 fingers and a short, downward flick. Veil secure. Proceed. Marin followed, her helmet sealed and the visor darkened to full opacity. Her body language was stripped of anything personal. To the untrained eye, she could have been anyone, just another faceless operator moving with Greer's escort. But every step carried tension coiled under the armor, an awareness honed by too many ambushes and too much silence. The hangar itself was empty, save for 3 Veil-cleared Marines, Vec, Harris, and Ral, waiting in precise formation near the far bulkhead. There were no salutes, no words, just curt nods as Greer passed. The sort of acknowledgement meant they'd seen enough of the black operations world to know the rules. You don't see what you're seeing. A deck officer, veil-cleared and stone-faced, approached with a datapad. He didn't ask for identification. Instead, he handed it to Greer, who scrolled through the orders. Theta 9, compartmentalized billet, Deck 6, sealed quarters, D12, meals delivered under escort. Fire team interface restricted to veil-cleared personnel only. No exposure to main detachment. Operational logs masked under rotational assignment. Greer passed the pad back with a single nod. There were no signatures, no names. The officer vanished as quickly as he had come. Marin didn't speak. Her duffel was slung high on her shoulder, one hand resting on the grip of her unmarked sidearm as though the motion kept her grounded. Her saber was hidden, broken down into components in a hard case at the bottom of her duffel. Jared had made sure of it before she left to Nagas. One last promise that even here, layers of protection remained. Beck stepped forward and gave a low, coded click over the veil channel. Deck secured. Theta 9 follows me. His tone carried no inflection. It wasn't speech for conversation, it was a ritual. A language used only when shadows were moving under heavier shadows. The route from the hangar to her sealed quarters was a ghost trail through the destroyer's belly. Bulkhead doors cycled open on silent hydraulics. Corridor lights dimmed to security glow, with cameras on blackout mode. Not a single Marine crossed their path, not by accident, not by oversight. Every intersection was clear before they arrived. Cabin C-12 was isolated near aft, far from the main barracks and standard duty rotations. A single stateroom, the lights already low. The bunk was stripped, a sealed locker against the wall, bolted down table and chair, and a tray slot by the door for meals. No viewport, no comm panel. Ral stepped in ahead of her, did a sweep, and then gave a 2-finger twist. Clean. Marin entered without hesitation, her duffel landing with a muted thud by the bunk. She didn't remove her helmet. This room wasn't a sanctuary. It was a holding pattern before the storm, and everyone knew it. Beck placed a hand briefly against the wall panel and to lock down the hatch from inside, the coded override flashing once red, and then once green. Meals every 6, he said quietly, the first actual word since docking, his voice muted through the vocoder. You don't open the hatch unless it's one of us. Marin inclined her head, one deliberate nod. There was no other acknowledgement needed. Greer stood in the hatch for a long moment, his eyes locked on hers through the visor. A short, downward flick of his finger said what words wouldn't. Stay sharp. Stay ready. She mirrored it. Always. Then he was gone, the door sealing with a hiss that left only the low hum of the destroyer around her. She sat on the edge of the bunk, her helmet still on, gauntlets resting on her knees, the weight of the veil pressing down like a second gravity. The silence wasn't safety. It was a test. One more layer of endurance before Druckenwell, before whatever trap waited there, before she could breathe freely again. If you see me slouching, please tell me. I'm notorious for that. Please tell me to stretch. Okay. Ghost briefing. Yeah, because I felt like I needed it. Ghost briefing. Veil secured wardroom. Docked at Catane shipyards. The hum of Kier's life support systems was the only sound in the narrow wardroom as the door sealed under veil clearance. A faint ripple of light passed over the entry frame, signaling a hard lock. No comms bleed. No recorders. No unapproved eyes or ears. Beyond these bulkheads, the ship bustled with standard marine readiness drills. But here, silence and shadow ruled. Only the select few who carried ash level clearance or higher remained. Captain IT, Beck, Harris, Rao, Greer at the head of the table, and Marin. Theta 9, sitting ramrod straight in unmarked fatigues. Even now, her presence was unspoken. No name, no record. Just the weight of everything that had led them here. The last 12 days had left invisible lines etched into all of them. The echoes of Collier clung like smoke. Kurtzsad brutality, screaming comm channels, and the gut-deep certainty that the colony would have been ash without their intervention. The Marines had stayed behind. A permanent detachment dug in with new relays. IT's quiet promise to the settlers they'd never be left unprotected again. But Collier had been more than a battle. It had been a warning. They all knew Deathwatch wasn't finished. Druckenwell's intel trail was proof of that. A breadcrumb far too neat to be chance. It was bait. Greer leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, his jaw set like iron. The hard light of the wardroom cast his face in sharp planes. The gray eyes of a man who'd carried a share of ghosts and wasn't done collecting more. He glanced once at Captain IT, then at the others, making sure every veil-coated nod came in return before he spoke. You all know why we're here, he began, his voice low, like gravel against steel. Command wants this fire snuffed out before it spreads. We've got intel, hand-fed through a channel we've already marked compromised. That there's a Deathwatch cell on Druckenwell, civilians in chains, an op we can't ignore. You didn't have to say. Crap. It hung unspoken in the air like smoke from a smoldering blast mark. Marin's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Every muscle screamed for movement, for control, for silence. Veil protocol ran through her like instinct now. Every gesture measured, every breath quiet. Her helmet sat on the table beside her. The only thing of her left uncovered was the resolve in her eyes, hardened by Collier and everything else before it. She felt Jared's quiet insistence like a phantom echo, still at her back. No identifiers, no saber in sight unless necessary, no tags. Leave everything personal behind. She had. Every trace of Marin Durza had been stripped away, sealed in a small pouch at the estate. What sat here now was only Theta 9. IT sat stiffly at Greer's right, half cooling on a forgotten mug at his elbow. We've got just enough to move, he said, his eyes shifting over the squad but never landing on her. But we go in light and surgical. Data 9 leads recon. Fire teams on backup. Harris, Beck, and Ral, you're with me on Overwatch and Exfil. No hero runs. If this goes loud, we pull out hard and fast. We've been ad starting in about 5 minutes. Beck gave a single, veil silent tap on the table. Acknowledge. Harris followed with a subtle flick of his fingers. Marin mirrored the signal automatically, but her mind was already turning over the shadows of this op. They knew Halloran's fingerprints were on the intel trail, but they had no proof that they could take up the chain. Not yet. And Dance. Every time Veilop shifted, he seemed to know just enough to be dangerous. Collier had given him the first ghost trail, Valkyrie's transfer the second. She could feel it tightening like a noose. Even here. Even now. What's the extraction window? She asked quietly, her voice flat and neutral, like she'd been trained to make it. The words were for operational necessity, nothing else. Greer's gaze cut to her, a flash of something protective buried under stone discipline. 3 hours hard cap once boots are on the ground, he said. You make contact, you confirm the civvies, you mark it, we pull you out. Anything beyond that, the site goes hot. We burn it. And if it's bad intel? She pressed, though she already knew the answer. Then it's a dry run, IT replied, his voice quieter but no less firm. We won't have waited to find out what they're really building down there. She nodded once. There were no wasted words. There was no space for fear or hesitation. Still, under the table, her gloved hand curled into a fist so tight her knuckles ached. She could still smell Collier's dirt and blood, hear the hollow cries of people who thought rescue would never come. If Druckenwell was even a fraction of that, there was no choice but to go. Your gear has been stowed in Shuttle Bay 4, Greer continued, shifting his gaze to the 3 Marines and then finally, deliberately, to her. No names, no marks, not this time. You suit up on the bird. We go in as ghosts and we come out the same way. His last words were a promise. But even promises and veil-ups had edges that could cut. Marin reached for her helmet, turning it once in her hands before setting it on the table with a deliberate finality. Understood, she said, and her voice carried that low, quiet steel that made even veterans look twice. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of Kira's systems and the muted thrum of distant engines through the hull. No one moved. They all knew the game they were stepping into. They all knew there were eyes on them that they couldn't see, threads of betrayal still buried deep in their own chain of command, and they all knew this op wouldn't just be about civilians, or Death Watch. It would be about ghosts, those they carried, those waiting to be made, and the ones already mapping their every step. Yeah. Ghosts in the fog. The fog rolled low over the industrial flats, carrying the acrid stink of burned fuel and metallic grit. It clung to the soil, to boots, to every breath. Every step left a shallow print in the gray earth, only to vanish seconds later beneath a swirling haze. The refinery lights far off to the east bled weakly through the murk, orange, blurred, and sullen. It was the kind of darkness that made you believe that there was no horizon, no sky, just an endless void waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to move too fast or breathe too loud. Marin crouched near the ridge, her unmarked armor slick with mist. Her helmet, stripped of sigils and paint, felt heavier than usual, like a weight clamping down on more than just her soul. There was no name tape on her chest, no insignia on her shoulders. She was a ghost among ghosts. And that was the point. She drew a slow breath, let it steady her for a moment, and then reached for her electro-binoculars. A quiet hand signal passed between Greer and Harris up ahead. The Master Sergeant's silhouette was a block of dark resolve against the murky glow. He didn't look back. He didn't really need to. Marin's presence was accounted for, just like Vec and Ral holding positions further off, watching the flanking angles. The fire team moved as one organism, trained long enough together that words were a luxury. Even here, under veil, words could betray them. I'm gonna pause right there because we have an ad starting. I will catch you guys in a minute. F. Welcome back, my friends. I hope we took advantage of that break. Right. Marin thumbed the electro binoculars active. Transparent still cutting through the fog to paint faint outlines of the compound ahead. A chain-link perimeter fence, 2 roving patrols with heavy rifles. 1 fixed turret on the north corner, manned, but lazy. The building itself was a hulking slab of durasteel stained with years of smog, venting heat in irregular plumes. Somewhere in there, if the intel wasn't another lie, Deathwatch had set up a staging point. Somewhere in there, civilians were supposed to be trapped, forced to labor or vanish. Somewhere in there, answers waited. Or a trap. She eased the macro binoculars down, tapping once against her thigh, and then sent them toward Greer in a slow, deliberate toss. His hand snapped up and caught them without looking. 2 fingers pointed forward and then curled twice. 2-man scout sweep. Marin nodded once, her hand pressed briefly to her own chest, indicating she'd take the lead. A faint incline of Greer's head gave permission. They moved like shadows, fog bending around their shapes. Every step was measured, every boot was placed where gravel wouldn't betray them. Marin's saber sat disguised on her belt, a plain cylinder indistinguishable from a grenade casing. The knives she carried were standard Marine issue, stripped of serial numbers. Tonight she carried only what wouldn't scream her name if they went down hard. They halted within 20 meters of the fence line. hunkering low beneath a skeletal frame of machinery discarded decades ago. Marin scanned the ground, eyes behind her visor mapping the patrol pattern, counting heartbeats and the pauses between footsteps. She traced the overlapping arcs of the searchlights and waited for a gap wide enough to matter. Greer leaned in just close enough that their armor brushed. No comms needed. His hand formed a silent code in the damp air. Pattern's wrong. It feels off. She tapped her index and middle fingers once against his forearm. I know. The fog thickened, carrying with it a metallic tang that sat wrong in the back of her throat. There was no force presence nearby. Not yet. But the quiet hum of danger was there all the same, crawling along her nerves. She pulled her awareness tight, making herself small and hidden. They couldn't afford a ripple tonight. Behind them, Harris shifted barely enough to be noticed, one hand flat at his side. Timer's close. We go in, or pull back? Greer responded with a short, firm gesture. We go. Marin let her breath out, the mist of it vanishing instantly in the cold air. She checked the emergency beacon built into her boot sole by flexing her foot slightly. It was still there, still ready. If this was a trap, and it probably was, they had one card to play for exfil, but only one. She raised a hand, palm flat, signaling the others to hold. She crawled forward the last few meters to a low break in the fence, a maintenance gap too small for armored soldiers to pass quickly. It would do. She waited for the patrol to turn its back, and then ducked low, her helmet brushing the rough edge of steel as she stepped through. One by one, the fire team followed, their bodies melding into the mist like they were part of it. At the edge of the yard, Marin froze, her eyes narrowing behind her visor. The pattern of their patrols had changed again. Too fast, too deliberate. They weren't wandering. They were herding, drawing them in. She reached back, two fingers slicing once across her palm and then curling to a fist. Not clean. Greer's answering signal was slow and deliberate. I know. Keep moving. Objective. First. They would keep pushing. They had to. The only way to confirm Deathwatch's hand in this was to step straight into the fog and find out what waited beyond. Marin swallowed dry, her fingers brushing the disguised saber on her belt. A silent mantra hummed in the back of her skull, an old echo from training days on Tanagas before she even went to the Praxium. Move quietly. See everything. Survive first. Questions later. She looked once toward Greer and caught the sharp nod of command, and then melted forward into the mist, one more ghost in a place already full of them. Guys. Don't hate me. Okay? Don't hate me if we leave on a cliffhanger. I'm having to, like, center myself as I read this because it's really intense. Okay. Ash whispers between the walls. The corridor breathes stale air and recycled heat, a damp whisper of machinery humming far below the floor plates. Pipes ran overhead like the bones of some long-dead beast, carrying warmth, power, and the illusion of life through the facility. Shadows clung stubbornly to the narrow angles between maintenance alcoves, where the pale strips of emergency lighting failed to reach. The whole place reeked of secrecy, the kind only built on the backs of prisoners and the lies of war. Marin moved first, a black silhouette against steel and grime, her carbine slung, but ready. Her HUD cast a faint blue-green glow across the interior of her blacked-out faceplate, mapping the branching corridors ahead with half-guessed intel from the compromised schematics they'd pulled an hour before insertion. Every step was deliberate, measured, Her weight spread low and quiet. A predator's patience threaded through every muscle. Behind her, Harris ghosted forward, his breath barely audible beneath his rebreather. Ral and Vec fanned wider, clearing bland corners with the fluid efficiency of men who had done this 100 times before and trusted each other enough not to look back. Greer brought up the rear, his presence solid and anchored, his eyes everywhere at once. A hand signal, sharp and low, flicked in Marin's peripheral vision. Halt. She obeyed instantly, sinking down near a junction. Vec mirrored the move without thinking, his boot heel resting on the edge of a floor panel that rattled faintly under his weight. Harris crouched behind a busted conduit, his rifle angled toward the corridor they'd just left. In the silence, only a faint buzz of dying fluorescence and the distant churn of ventilation filled the air. Marin tapped 2 fingers against the seam of her vambrace. A veil micro signal. Status? A breath later, Greer answered in kind, just the tilt of his head and a deliberate press of his glove to his forearm. Unclear. Hold until sweep confirms. Ral's response was a brief curl of his hand near his chest. Left corridor, faint heat trace. Patrol ahead. Even without names, even stripped of all the comms chatter they might have had in an open op, they moved like thought given form. Layered signals, silent orders, and a language spoken only by those who knew what it was to vanish into the dark and survive it. Somewhere deeper in the compound, muffled through walls and wires, a burst of static popped in the distance. A security system resetting or someone watching them far closer than they should have been. The hair at the back of Marin's neck prickled under her helmet. She drew the force in, threading it around her presence like a cloak, as much as a reflex as a choice. The facility felt wrong. Too empty. The corridors were too clean. There was no sign of laborers or guards where Intel said there'd be dozens. The map on her HUD flickered once, glitching as if the building itself was lying. She slipped a gloved hand to the console by the sealed door ahead, her fingers working carefully over the corroded keys. A fragment of code pulled from an earlier junction, risked and won, slid into the slot like a blade between ribs. The panel gave a grudging chirp, and the door stuttered before sliding aside with a faint hiss. Marin waited. 1 breath. 2. Scanning with both visor optics and the force. Nothing moved. The dark beyond the door smelled like dust and coolant. She glanced back. Greer's fist closed slowly near his chest. Go. But tight formation. Harris dipped his chin, his rifle coming up higher as he prepared to cover. Vec's hand hovered over a frag grenade at his belt, but he didn't pull it free. Ral's fingers danced briefly. Sector feels wrong. Eyes open. Marin took a breath and slid through, her boots whispering against the metal floor. The others followed, each step placed in near-perfect unison, a rhythm learned over too many deployments. The corridor beyond narrowed, the lighting dimmer, casting everything in a sickly yellow wash that made the shadows feel thicker. Every junction felt like a throat waiting to close. Further back in the facility, unseen, screens flickered in a control hub. A hooded figure stood behind a trembling officer, silent, hanging like a blade. They are here, my lord, the officer whispered, his voice shaking. Did we raise security? Open fire? The figure didn't speak. A slow shake of the hooded figure's head, a breath of words too soft to catch. The officer swallowed hard and nodded once. Understood, my lord. Marin eased to a halt at a junction and dropped to a knee behind a jutting support strut, her eyes flicking between her HUD and the darkness beyond. A part of her wanted to risk a burst transmission to Cure to let IT know the map was unreliable, that the corridor didn't match intel. But Veil Protocol wasn't just about silence. It was survival. Every signal could be the one that cost them extraction. She pulled the force even closer, not opening herself fully, just enough to feel the faintest echo ahead. It wasn't patrols that unnerved her this time. It was the absence of them, like they'd been deliberately pulled back. Her breath came shallow behind her helmet, a tension she'd forced down as she checked her carbine sling. Knives were in easy reach at her thigh. No insignia, no name tape, just black armor and the weight of choices that could not be unmade. Greer crouched beside her, his hand briefly closing over her gauntlet. Not a word, just a squeeze of command and reassurance all at the same time. His other hand signaled in quick, tight motions that were barely visible. Trap. Possible. We move anyway. No room to stall. Raw's fingers flashed agreement. Harris checked his chrono and then swept his rifle for the next bend, the silent ready in his stance. Beck's shoulders rolled once, loosening tension before he moved to cover the rear. Marin's gloved hand tightened on her carbine. She could feel her pulse in her ears, a drumbeat trying to cut through the calm. Reckless, yes. Necessary? More than ever. They couldn't fail, not with what Dreckenwell might cost if they came up empty. She breathed once more, signaled advance with two fingers low near her thigh, and stepped out of cover. 4 shadows moved with her, slipping down the corridor like ghosts through the fog, silent and unseen, knowing full well something unseen was waiting, and that every step forward brought them closer to a snare already laid. Okay. Need more water. I'll have you know, this is about the halfway point of the story. Well, oh yeah, chapter 15 was the halfway point, so this is chapter 17. There are 30 chapters in this story. And this is but one of several in Marin's arc. Okay. When the trap brings. The air inside the compound was heavy, thick with the reek of burned lubricants and dust from old industrial fans that stirred only occasionally, as if reluctant to disturb the silence. Shadows clung to the exposed conduits running across the ceiling, broken only by the faint amber strips that ran low along the walls. Theta 9 moved like wraiths. Sorry. The Marines moved like wraiths through the corridor, unmarked armor swallowing what light remained, their rifles raised, and every step measured. Marin crouched at the front of the stack, her electro binoculars clipped to her belt, her eyes cutting left and right. A closed fist lifted. Halt. 2 fingers flicked forward, a low, silent signal before she eased ahead. Greer followed close, his glove tapping twice against her pauldron in acknowledgement. A steady anchor at her back. Beck kept their 6 locked down, his rifle sweeping arcs that intersected with Harris's movements to the left. Ral ghosted between rear and flank, his boots whispering over the grime. There were no voices, no comms chatter, only the faintest vibration of haptic pings in their gloves kept them bound as one. The map IT had passed them said the sublevel was dead space, maintenance quarters left to rot, long out of use. But every instinct screamed otherwise. Marin's boots halted on a faint track in the dust. Fresh scuffs dragged across the plating. She tilted her helmet just enough for Greer to see. One gloved finger tracing the line of prints and then a fist close to her chest. Wrong. Greer's visor dipped in a small nod, but his only reply was a flat palm angled forward. And then his fingers spread. Proceed. Eyes open. All angles. Harris eased past, slicer pad in one hand. His fingers flicked a quick veil sign. Code old, opening quietly. Beck's answering gesture was sharp, hovering rear. Movement fast. Marin knelt by the doorframe, one palm hovering. the force coiled inside her chest, drawn down to a muted ember that gave off no light. The panel gave way with a faint hiss that sounded too loud. Sorry. Every nerve screaming, alert. Eris froze. Helmet tilting toward Marin, 2 fingers brushing a sign low to his side. Bait. She glanced back, a fractional shake of her head, and then 2 fingers tapping her belt. Objective priority. Greer shifted his rifle, the movement a promise more than a scent. Orders were orders. The door opened. The chamber beyond was cavernous, full of old scaffolds and dead conveyor belts vanishing into shadow. Marin raised a fist. Clear. They flowed inside like liquid shadow, rifle sweeping every corner. 10 meters in. Their world slammed shut. Blast doors roared down at both ends, the sound a hammer strike through the deck plates. Red lights flared overhead, bathing everything in blood and warning. Vents screamed, hissing gas that burned the back of their throats even through the filters. A vibration buzzed sharply against Marin's palm. Contact. Vex's haptic pulse followed. Up high, multiple. Figures dropped through from the catwalks above, armored shapes opening fire and precision bursts meant not to kill, but to herd. Marin shoved Harris hard toward cover, already reaching for the disguised cylinder on her belt. Give me a second. Oh dear. Your timing, G-Train. By the way, welcome in. She had one heartbeat to think about staying quiet, another to realize silence was useless. The orange blade flared to life, cutting through smoke as stun nets arced toward her from both sides. She burned the first out of the air, pivoting, but the second coiled from her blind flank, electric current searing through her muscles. She dropped to one knee, teeth clenched behind her visor. Whew. Can I get a shout out for G-Turn, please? Oh, that gives me a chance to pause. I don't know about you, but my blood pressure's up a little bit. Vocabulary. Alright. You know what? We're going to use an earlier word as today's vocabulary. So earlier in the chapter, I think, there was a word that is Mandoa. It is Daryaim, which is basically hell. So, there you go. There you go. That's your vocabulary word for the day. Righty. A new PC. Well, it's mostly new. Nice one, right? Yes. New PC? It's holding. I mean, the case is still the same case. It's just a bunch of new internals. So, it's functioning. It's running pretty okay. Yes. Yes, it's basically the same setup. I had to swap out a bunch of internal components. So, but it's functional, it's really solid. So, I'm just glad that it's working and holding at a reasonable temperature. So, I'm excited about that. And I'm back to streaming, obviously. So, had about a 2-month break while I fixed everything. Yeah, oh no, he was actually a huge help. So, between him and a couple of other people, yes. Between him and a couple of other people, we were able to get the parts we needed. I think he's lurking here somewhere. I think so. Or he was. I don't know. He usually is. Yes. I know. I was really missing it. There we go. Okay, I am accident prone today. I don't know if you caught that because background, but I just knocked over the empty water bottle. I'm a hot mess today. All good though, you know. Okay. Oh, I did post the vocabulary up above. If you go look just below your shout out, it is there. He's not wrong. Okay. We are nearing the end of the chapter, my friends. We got like 2 more pages?
Do it.
Oh, very well timed. Thank you. Yes, well timed G-Train, thank you very much. That's why they're there. Alright. I needed to get some water. 2 more pages to go, and I'm apologizing in advance. Don't hate me. But do please tell me what you think in chat. I would love to hear your feedback. Okay. 2 quick pulses hit her glove. Rare signal. Fall back. Reach to extract. Marin twitched her fingers in reply. Negative. Hold. Before the second net slammed into her. Pain exploded, white hot, locking her body mid-step. Her saber spun from her grip, clattering uselessly across the floor. Harris lunged, but Vec tackled him. A desperate pulse through the haptic net. No line. Pinned down. Rel's rifle barked in controlled bursts, a hand flashing signals. Suppress. Cover. Retreat. Thanks, G-Train. Marin's last blurred sight was boots rushing toward her, stun batons crackling. She fought to push up to her knees, but her body was unresponsive, her fingers twitching toward the force, and then another surge dropped her flat. Her breath rattled in her helmet. Hands dragged her by the arms away from her saber, toward a hatch she hadn't seen on entry. Greer's visor turned her way for half a heartbeat. A silent promise carved in iron, and then his glove tapped twice against his rifle, a signal Vec. Harris and Ral knew by heart. Exfil, now. Suppressing fire lit the chamber as the rest of the squad clawed their way out, step by step. Marin's world went dark to the sound of retreating boots, and one last haptic pulse through her glove. A faint buzz from Greer, signaler still linked to hers. Hold. I will come for you. Thank you for the posture check, G-Train. You're getting a free stretch out of that. Because I was hunching. Okay. No, wait a minute and a half. Okay. Well, I can read, like, the first paragraph or 2. Okay. Ash carried in silence. The camp was a low sprawl of durasteel and camo netting, crouched in the lee of an abandoned refinery wall. The air was damp with chemical haze, blaster scoring still fresh on the dirt outside the wire. Data 9's absence hung heavier than the morning fog, though no one spoke of it. Greer led the survivors through the checkpoint, boots crunching over gravel. His posture was squared, his visor angled forward, but his gait carried a fraction more weight than when they deployed. Harris' back fell in tight behind him, every line of their armor rigid with discipline. Raoul's gloves flexed once on his rifle grip before he forced them still. And I'm going to pause right there because we have an ad starting in like 5 seconds. I will see you guys back in a minute and a half. Oh, he should have stayed. We've only got like a page and a half yet. And then we're done with the chapter. Like I said, don't hate me. Welcome back from the ad, my friends. Alright. Find the right window over here. Give me a second. There we go. Just double checking something real quick. Alright, my friends. Halloran and Dance stood near one of the comms arrays, ostensibly checking feeds from the recon drones. Both turned as Theta-9's detail returned. Halloran's expression was the careful mask of a man who already thought he knew the story. Dance's visor lingered a heartbeat too long on the gap in their line before sweeping away again. Greer ignored them both. He didn't speak as he handed his rifle to their armorer. He just tapped the mag release once, bent, and stalked toward the command tent. IT glanced up from a holomap as Greer entered, the only sound the flap settling behind him. The captain's eyes flicked over the missing fourth and then fixed on Greer's visor. Waiting. A tiny shift of Gur's fingers on the edge of the table. One down. Theta 9. IT's jaw tightened, a minuscule nod following. Status? Greer's glove made the smallest, sharpest line in the dust on the table. Taken. Not dead. IT exhaled once, low and silent, and then rested a palm flat against the holomap. The subtle pressure meant understood. Plain extraction. Neither man spoke. Outside the tent, voices carried. Halloran laughing low at something Dance muttered, sound grating in its ease. Greer's gaze flicked toward the flap once, a fractional tilt of his helmet. IT gave a nearly imperceptible hand flex. No names. Not here. Greer straightened, his hands still. IT keyed a datapad, jotting nothing but supply numbers for any observer glancing in. The words he didn't say were a thread of steel between them. We're not finished. She is not finished. A breath later, Greer dipped his head, a gesture small enough to be missed if one blinked. He stepped back, his gauntlet brushing the table once, waiting for orders. IT replied with a shift of weight, 2 fingers barely touching the datapad. Stand by. No signals until the veil lifts. When Greer stepped out of the tent, his faceplate was once again an unbroken wall of marine calm. Halloran offered a flat, performative. Rough run? Nothing worth a report, Greer said evenly, voice a perfect soldier's monotone. He didn't break stride, his boots crunching toward the perimeter as Vec, Harris, and Rao fell in behind. Only once they reached the farthest corner of the wire out of every unshielded earshot did Greer let his glove twitch once against his thigh. 3 pulses answered from his fire team almost in unison. Theta 9 lives. No one needed to add the last part. The vow sat in the dirt with them like an unlit beacon. We'll burn the galaxy before we leave her behind. Be 1 second while I grab something really quick. Need to find it. Oh gosh, I can't find it. Oh, found it. Okay. Just like, oh dear. Took me a second. Okay, there we go. I was trying to find something really quick. Okay. The mission survives because we do not speak. Veil doctrine, oral maxim, 10. There comes a point when silence is no longer just protection. It becomes resolve. When doubt presses in, when the pattern feels wrong and the trap is almost visible, restraint is what keeps the mission intact. Under Veil, survival depends not on explanations or reassurances, but on discipline. Moving forward without announcing fear, without giving the enemy a sound to follow. What remains unsaid is what carries the mission past the breaking point. And that, my friends, is the end of Chapter 17. Thank you so much for being with me here tonight. I know it was a little heavy, and I apologize for that, and it's very much a cliffhanger. Again, please don't hate me. It just kind of worked out that way. So, thank you for everyone who was here. I greatly appreciate it. And, my next stream is going to be... Give me just a second. Oh, wow. Hold on. I am a hot mess today. my next stream is going to be hey Taba. My next stream is going to be March 4th with some SWTOR. So I don't know what we're gonna do in SWTOR, but we'll probably do some version of our normal shenanigans. So hang around for that, and if you'd like to tag along and have a subscription, please feel free to join me. I would love the company. And then my next workshop stream, so that's next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then, oh, also that brings me to my announcement, which I forgot to do Sunday. I have switched my stream times so that I don't have to keep switching the calendar every 6 months. So I'm kind of going with daylight savings time, or lack thereof. So up until daylight savings time kicks in, I'm streaming at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then Sunday the 8th, I believe that's going to be 7 p.m. I would love to not have to change times on all of the things. Unfortunately, I don't have control over that, and it's a pain to try and remember to do it. So I just got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm just not gonna mess with it. But I don't know. I decided I'd kind of play with it for a little while and see how it goes. But maybe I will just go back to 7 across the board, because 6 p.m. stream start is a bit rough when I don't get home till 5. So we'll see how that goes. But thank you for everybody who was here this evening. I hope you enjoyed the story, even though it wasn't cozy. Definite cliffhanger vibes going on. Benji tank for season 10. You will not catch me in PvP, I will tell you that right now. I rage in PvP. And I do not need my blood pressure getting jacked. I really don't. I will probably do anything except PvP. Thank you, Taba, and everybody else who was here. Even if you were looking, I hope you appreciated the story and enjoyed it. And tune in 2 weeks for the next chapters. But if you'd like to see me sooner than that, I will be live on Wednesday, March 4th with some SWTOR. Hope to see you then. Have a great evening, my friends. If you'd like to hang around, I'm gonna see if there's anybody to raid into. Let's see. I don't know. I didn't raid out last time because for stream back, so it was kind of a thing. So I am going to... You know what? Do you guys want some cozy vibes after that? Let's go for some cozy vibes. Give me 2 seconds. Yeah, you know what? We're gonna go say hi to the Mega Queen. I think she just started her stream. She is a fellow member of the Survivor Squad. I haven't actually rated her in a while. So we're gonna go say hi. Because I don't know about you, but I need some cozy vibes after that. I need a hug. Okay? I need a hug after that. So we are gonna go say hi to the Mega Queen and give her some of our awesome vibes and cool peoples. So let me get that set up if you guys would be so kind as to hang around. Again, my friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight, and I do hope you enjoyed the story. And I'll see you next time.